Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, your source for travel stories, travel destinations, and travel philosophy.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Ryan.
And we're your hosts.
Welcome to the World Wanderers podcast. We are glad to have your earspace today.
Yeah. What are we talking about today?
So today we are doing a year in review episode. This is the last episode that we're going to be putting out in 2017. We're taking a couple weeks break on the podcast. So over the past 2 years, we've done year in review episodes where we've looked back at, what's changed, what we've done, what the highlights were, the lessons we've learned. So we are going to do that today for 2017.
Yeah, and so this is a practice that we've gotten into in the last couple of years, and it's a really great thing to get into, regardless of if you have, a podcast like we do where other people are listening. It's just like a really great way to kind of review your year, see what worked, see what didn't work, talk about the places you've been, the places you haven't been, the things you want to do. And I think that it really sets the stage for having a really great, upcoming year. So in this case, it's a really great way to review our last year and really set the tone for next year. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think it can be nice to look back over your past year. So we started 2017 in Myanmar. We were visiting the Golden Rock for New Year's. And we had just left Thailand. So we spent a month in Chiang Mai, Thailand, kind of like getting set up. We had been doing our digital nomad thing for a few months at that point, but still just kind of like halfway through our time in Asia, getting used to life as a digital nomad. And we had taken a bit of a break to go to Myanmar and have a bit of an adventure there. And then, so to kind of like fast forward through, what happened at the start of our trip, or start of our year, travel-wise. We went from Myanmar quickly to Thailand and then over to Indonesia, where we spent 2 months in Ubud on Bali.
Yeah, and that was a massive highlight, I think, for the year. It was kind of this point in our Asia trip where we were, getting kind of tired because we've been moving around quite a bit. Like, we went into Asia with the intention of staying for at least a month everywhere we went. And then, we found out that the Philippines had bad Wi-Fi, so then we only stayed there for a week. And then we ended up going to Singapore for a week, and then we went to Malaysia for 10 days. And then we didn't spend as long in Macau as we wanted to, made a quick stop in China. It was like all this crazy stuff happened before we finally got to Chiang Mai. And, then we had this trip to Myanmar plans. And so getting to Indonesia was like, okay, we're like staying put for at least a month. And we loved it so much that we ended up extending for 2 months.
Yeah. And it was really, after doing so much quick travel and the thing we had learned was that it is very hard to balance out work when you're traveling quickly. So, spending that time getting into a bit of a routine was really enjoyable and really kind of informed our travels later on and what we kind of set out to do this winter. So we left Indonesia, went to Malaysia for a quick stopover because Kuala Lumpur had become a favorite place for us. And then went to Japan to meet up with 2 friends, and we spent about 3 weeks traveling around Japan and really falling in love with that country.
Yeah, that was probably one of the most surprising destinations of 2017, I think. It was a country that I had imagined liking, but not falling so incredibly in love with. And, it quickly skyrocketed to, the top 5 for sure of my favorite countries. And it was just a really amazing trip. And it was also really cool because we got to do it with our good friends, Steve and Julia. And I think there's something pretty awesome about getting to travel with good friends and, experience these amazing things with other people that you really care about.
Yeah, and that was kind of a new experience for us. We've traveled together quite a bit. We've traveled alone. We've traveled with other people, but we never really traveled with friends. And, yeah, it was really fun. It was really nice, especially after just traveling around Asia for a while. We had been able to meet friends, other travel people in the travel industry, some listeners to the podcast, things of that nature. But to have like a more, friends you've been friends with for, at that point, I guess like over a year, for a while longer, it was really nice to do that. And felt good. One of the benefits about being a digital nomad is you can go anywhere, but not being based permanently, you kind of lose that like
sense of community.
Yeah.
friendship.
And a lot of your interactions become like catching up. You don't really get to like have other non-catch-up discussions that often.
Yeah, we haven't had like a group of friends, I guess you could say, for a couple of years now. And I think that we've definitely got some really quality people in our lives. And we're both for sure like quality over quantity when it comes to our friendships, as I think that most people should. So if you're about quantity, you should maybe journal about that. But anyways, it was really nice to spend, just some quality time with, good friends. And for anyone out there, I mean, most of you who listen travel, so it's like, that you kind of get into these little routines. So you and I have like years and years of travel experience together. So we know the things that we love to do, and we know our routine, and we know how we work together and that sort of thing. So it's always interesting to add other people into the mix. And, sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. And it was really amazing to have it just really like mesh really well traveling with Steve and Julia.
Yeah, and so we went from Japan to Taiwan to Korea, and then back to Canada for the summer. And, so if you're curious about any of these places, we've got podcast episodes about all of them, so you can go check those out. But something that was interesting that time was like ending a big trip and not really, and being like excited to go back home.
Yeah. In our previous backpacking trips, I felt like I really wasn't ready to come home. And, the first time around, I was really in a financial spot where I needed to work again. And so I kind of had to come home. And then the second time around to South America, I wasn't in a tight financial spot. And I really was on this path of personal development where I felt like it wasn't a good time for me to come home. Yet, we had these plans and these tickets, and it was just what we felt like at that point that we had to do. And coming around to the end of Asia, I felt like, okay, like I'm really ready to see like my friends and family and like be a part of the Canmore community again, and, get back to the yoga studio I love and eat at all my favorite restaurants and, hug my mom and all those types of things. What do you think it was about the Asia trip that made us like ready to come home this time around?
Well, I don't know if it was necessarily anything about that's kind of like framing it in a way that I probably wouldn't frame it. I think we were traveling for a longer period of time, and it was also less of a transition lifestyle-wise. So in the past, it was, being on this backpacking trip where there was a lot of like freedom from responsibilities and going home and, settling down and getting a job and maybe feeling like you were being forced back into something you weren't quite ready for. Whereas for us, it just was basically like a change of geography. It was like, okay, now we're going to have more space and it's going to be like less polluted and quieter. And we were also, traveling quite a bit still. Even though we said like, oh, we're going back home, we ended up moving around a lot over the course of the summer. So much so that I think up until recently, Bali was like the longest place we stayed in one place for this year.
Yeah, I think today is actually our 2 months exactly in Mexico City. So as of tomorrow from the recording date will be the longest we've been in one place since we were in Bali. So just to give a quick little run through as to what our summer looked like, we came back in secret because I was surprising a friend, a really good friend from university for her bachelorette party, which was actually an amazing way to come home. Got to deal with jet lag without anyone knowing that I was even back in the country. And then, we spent a couple weeks with Ryan's parents in interior British Columbia before heading back to our home away from home, or home when we were in Canada, of Canmore. We were there for a couple weeks before heading out to Montreal and Toronto. Came back to Canada for a couple weeks, headed down to the US, did a couple different destinations over a month in the US. Came back to Canada just in time for my brother's wedding and our good friend's wedding. And then I set out for the West Coast Trail. You stayed in Canmore. We came back, headed back to the States for another wedding, and then flew to Mexico City. So it really wasn't like a quiet, relaxing couple of months at home, which is, I think, what I kind of had in mind when we decided to go home. But it was still really fun. We got to do lots of cool stuff and explore more of Canada, which was really great.
So, given all of those different places we went to, what would you say, one or two highlights were for you travel-wise?
I think the time that we spent in Bali was a massive highlight for me. I think that I was really ready at that point to have some regular routine, and I love Ubud a ton. I really loved it the first time I went after my yoga teacher training, and it was really great to kind of dig into the community there. We had a great situation where, within 15 to 20 minutes of walking, we could get to the yoga studio, the yoga barn, we could get to the co-working space that we were working at, and we could eat so much delicious food for a really affordable cost. So that was definitely a highlight. And then my other highlight would be Japan. Japan like blew my mind in so many ways. And, like I said before, it's one of my favorite countries in the world. And then another highlight that I want to touch on is Seoul in South Korea. We were only there for a week. But it was just a really great week. I totally fell in love with kimchi and, experiencing Korean culture was really, really interesting. And after a so-so month in Taiwan, I didn't really have high expectations for Seoul, and I just really, really enjoyed it. What about you?
So definitely just life in Bali was really good. It was we were eating great food. It was affordable, a good sense of community at the place you were working at. Had, experience of working at a really cool co-working space for the first time. And just felt really like productive and fulfilled in that period of time. Traveling Japan with friends, was amazing. Especially like Tokyo, especially just really stood out as like, just an awesome city and a place I would love to spend more time and get to explore. The food's amazing. It's very, I don't know if orderly is the right word, but not overwhelming at all for such a big city. And then
I think orderly is a good word for it. And
then, Mexico City has been a really big highlight for me. I've really enjoyed life here. Learning Spanish, eating Mexican food, getting to go to the concerts and other things has been awesome.
Yeah, after I stopped talking, I was also thinking that Mexico City was a massive highlight for me. It's kind of weird how I almost feel like we like wrapped up our year after Asia and then kind of had this like crazy time in Canada, and then Mexico City feels like this really new chapter for us, which makes me feel like it's in a different year, even though it's like in the same calendar year. But yeah, we were at this really amazing outdoor show the other night. And, we've had such cool experiences in Mexico City, even though we're working the majority of the time. And I was just thinking like, man, I love this city. Like, I think that this might be, my favorite city in the world. It's just so awesome here. And it's been a really great 2 months, and I'm excited for the coming months here as well.
Yeah.
And so, on the flip side of that, every year provide some awesome stuff, but do you want to talk a little bit about, the lowlights or the things that weren't so great for 2017?
So the first thing that jumps to my mind was being sick in Myanmar. Both of us got sick right at the end of our time there and just really wanted to be back in comfortable places. So that's the first thing that jumps to my mind. I think the second thing would be, so at the start of July, I took on a lot more work responsibilities, and then having our summer set up so that it was going to be kind of like we would have before with kind of less on my plate, more flexibility, but having kind of way more responsibility with a lot of travel made for quite a stressful period of time. So yeah, that kind of like stands out as like, it was definitely like a grind and a hard period of time to make it through.
Yeah, I think I would agree with both of those. Having food poisoning in Myanmar was so unpleasant. It's like one of the sickest I've ever been. And it's kind of like I'd almost like counted my chickens too early, because I was like, okay, it's been 13 out of the 16 days we're here. Like, I can't believe I haven't had, diarrhea or been sick at all. And it's like, bam, you're going to spend the entire night throwing up. And it was awful. And yeah, I mean, I think that taking on a bigger workload and getting a really awesome new role is amazing. I think that that's, been a highlight in a lot of ways, because it's been a cool experience for you over the last, almost 6 months. But I think that, in the context of it just being really sudden and us already having a lot of plans for the summer, it was a big challenge. And, you know, it was a challenge for me, like going to Toronto and being like, okay, well, you know, my work schedule is not so flexible anymore. So, okay, I'll go to Niagara Falls, by myself. Or I guess I should say your work schedule wasn't so flexible. So for me, I'm thinking like, okay, I got to do these things by myself if I want to do them. And I think there's a lot of value out of, you know, really tuning into what you want to do and doing things on your own, especially as a couple. But I think it was quite challenging to adjust to a new sort of lifestyle, like moving from this really flexible digital nomad lifestyle to, you know, still being like location independent and being able to work from anywhere with Wi-Fi, but having to be more like online more often and at more specific times.
And then on the podcast front, 2017 was a cool year for us in a couple ways. One, the amount of people listening to the podcast increased quite a bit, so much so that in 2017, more people listened to the podcast than had in the previous history of the podcast combined. And we were actually able to go out and meet up with a whole bunch of you guys in person. So, you know, getting to hang out with, you know, listeners to the podcast, building some community around it, has been really cool. And also on the other side of that, you know, some people who we had interviewed on the podcast are able to meet up in person. For example, Brock in Taiwan and Korea.
And Mexico City.
And recently here in Mexico City again.
Nathan, who's been on the podcast as well, we met up with in, you know, Thailand was before, but Thailand, Bali, and then Mexico as well. Jake and Michelle meeting up in Bali. We're going to meet up again in Mexico in another month, getting to connect with lots of people from our online community. And that's also a highlight for me too. You know, I'm a part of a lot of Facebook groups, and you know, we kind of, you know, had these conversations back and forth about whether or not we should start our own Facebook group. And, you know, with your workload, you were pretty straight up about, you know, I don't have time to manage a Facebook group because it's not a lot of work, but it is a little bit of work just to make sure that it, you know, continues flourishing and growing and that sort of thing. So I took on the responsibility of creating this online community, and it's been really awesome because I feel like, you know, as a listener, you get to hear us and you get to know us, but we don't really get to know you unless you reach out to us and tell us about yourself. And lots of people do that, which is really cool, but it's like we hear this one portion of their travel story and then we never hear from them again. And with the online community, if you're on Facebook, then you can just, you know, hop on over, keep in touch with their travels. And I think it's just a really fun way to be like, oh, you're in Mexico City? Like, cool, let's hang out. It kind of takes like social media to a whole new level in a really personal way. So that's been a really fun adventure for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then another highlight for the podcast was speaking at Podcast Movement. That was easily one of the coolest things that I think I did in all of 2017. It was a really, really surreal experience to get to meet some of the people in the podcast world that we've been looking up to for a number of years. Like people who are the reason that, you know, we have a podcast and that, you know, our podcast has had some success. And so, you know, that was amazing. And then standing up in front of a group of people and having people who had questions about what we do and that sort of thing was just a really, really fun experience. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it was fun too because that was something we had, you know, applied to do back in the spring, and then, you know, it was one of those like events, things you're looking forward to in the future, and then it, you know, actually happened, which is really cool. And it was also a good experience to be able to travel around LA and get to experience LA for the first time.
Yeah, your first time, my first time since I was like 7, which, yeah, it's just an amazing city. And I feel like it's one of those things, one of those places that you just kind of need to go to. So it was definitely neat getting to experience that. And then another highlight for the podcast was hiring our amazing production assistant, Shalini. She applied to a post that we posted early in the new year in 2017. We were growing a ton and just finding that we needed a lot of, you know, or not needed, but wanted, you know, some help so that we could take some of the lower level stuff off of our plates and pass it on to somebody else. But particularly somebody who is really passionate about about travel, about the travel industry, and also looking to learn about audio production. And Shalini applied amongst a couple other people, and we ended up taking her on as our intern for 4 months, but she blew us away so much that we ended up hiring her before that time was over. And since that point, she's been on her own adventure for a couple months. So it's been really cool being able to be in different countries around the world, yet continue to have, her assistance. And it's really helped us out with, continued production of the podcast. And I think her sound editing is better than mine. So it's always good too.
So yeah, 2017, we've been to a lot of places. We've done a lot of things. Our work's changed quite a bit and evolved and gotten better. So what would you say a couple the biggest lessons you've learned or takeaways you've had from this year have been?
I think one of my biggest lessons from 2017 has been that, working and traveling is really different in reality than I think I had in my mind. I had it in my mind that we would be able to, arrive in a place, do a bit of work, go explore, do a bit of work, explore some more. And that can get really, really exhausting really fast. And I found that when I had work on my plate, it was hard to go out and explore and not be thinking about those things that I needed to do. And so basically I found that, depending on work levels and that sort of thing, it's actually really great to stay put for a little bit longer. I found that, even longer than a month is a really great time frame for me to dive into a culture and to find a yoga studio I like and to discover restaurants and make friends and that sort of thing. And it's one of the things that I'm most excited about with our time in Mexico City is that we're, staying pretty put here and just doing more weekend getaways as opposed to hauling all of our stuff around constantly, just because that was, pretty exhausting for the majority of 2017.
Yeah, I can definitely concur with that. I think now that we've had this experience over the past couple of years, I can really say that between 3 and 9 months is the sweet spot for me in terms of staying in one place. And maybe that'll change over time. Maybe we'll find some more places that we love to be. But being in Asia, one was kind of our planning. We were planning to move quickly. But 2 was also just the visas and situation around being a tourist there. You can't stay in most countries more than 30 days. Some have 60, Japan and a couple, I think Japan has 90. Korea might have 6 months.
I think Korea's 180.
But for most part, it's a month, which makes it, challenging. Either it's I have to do border run or just need to leave. So, yeah. Being in one place for a longer period of time, and especially as we've taken on more stuff, it's having that kind of stability and structure and kind of a home base and then traveling from there is just so much more enjoyable.
Yeah, definitely. I think another big lesson that I've learned in 2017 is that, there are certain things that are really important to me. And one of the biggest ones that I've really honed in on over the last year is that, my health is really important to me. And that means that being in places where I can get, where I can comfortably eat, fresh foods that make my body feel good is really important. And I found that as much as I love trying local food, I also really love having a balance with, foods that are healthy and fresh and, make my body feel good. And so I really love going to places, Mexico is a perfect example where we can find, healthy, fresh salads that aren't going to make us sick, but then we can also go out and enjoy local tacos for a really good price. And I get a really good balance between taking care of myself and enjoying local food. And that's just been something that's been really important for me over the last year. And I've just learned to be more open and honest and, communicate those needs a little bit more instead of pretending like it's not important and just trying to, eat things that I don't feel well after and that sort of thing. And that's part of the reason why I loved Bali so much.
Yeah, it's just amazing food there, and really, really affordable.
Yeah. Do you have any other lessons that you've learned this year?
I think a big thing for me is just really understanding a lot more about what makes myself happy. That's a weird way to put it, but just a better sense of getting fulfillment. I think, just having a bigger challenge over the last half of this year, has definitely, stretched me. It's helped me grow, but it just gives me like a much deeper sense of fulfillment that maybe I was missing during the first half as we were traveling and, investing a lot of our time in, moving around and going to new places, which is exciting and fun. But I think I think it's like a piece of the thing that makes me happy, but it's definitely not, the whole thing.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that as well. I think I was kind of looking, when we went to Asia, like, how can I maximize my time spent exploring and minimize my time working, but also make as much money as possible? And I think that that's a really unrealistic goal unless you've been working, really hard for a number of years to implement a lot of processes that give you, a lot of passive income. Like passive income is this word that's tossed around a lot, but I think it's, most people are not just doing nothing who get passive income or who get, consistent income. There's a lot of front end work to stuff like that. And I think that you really have to put the effort in to get the return. And it's also really fulfilling to do that. So over the last 6 months, as you've stepped into a bigger role, I've also been focusing a lot on my yoga business, and I've really seen it thrive as I've put more effort into it. And I think that we've still been able to, go, well, I know, because, we have this list of places we've still been able to explore and do these things that make us happy and still be able to see new places. I think another big learning for me has been that, when I spend time at home, it's really important for me to spend, at least a month really like staying put there. I have great relationships with people there. My family's there. It's such a beautiful part of the world. And I found that it was really hard to like be there for a couple of weeks and then bump around somewhere else and then be back for a couple of weeks and then bump around. And I felt like it was, hard to connect with my friends as much and really feel like I was settled and integrated into the community the way I was the summer before. And it's definitely something that going forward, looking ahead to this summer, I really want to think about, if we're going to be there, I really just want to be there, and I want to, invest my time and energy into being in that one place, as opposed to like being there for a couple of days and then going elsewhere and then being there for a couple of days, going elsewhere, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. It was certainly a challenge, traveling so much last summer, and it was awesome because we were able to do so many cool things. Go to, for example, visit some friends in Charleston. We were able to meet up with a bunch of practice people in Atlanta, speak at Podcast Movement, go to weddings. So really, really cool experiences. But yeah, it's just hard to balance with everything else going on. So I'm looking forward to just kind of setting up and being more like stable in one place next summer. Yeah, but let's look ahead to 2018. What's on our radar for next year?
Yeah, so, next year we're going to spend close to the first half of the year in Mexico City. We are going to be here till about mid-May, and, January is taking us to Guadalajara to see Michelle and Jake who are retired toddlers. Well, I guess they're toddlers of the retired toddlers, but parents of the retired toddlers. February has us going to a conference and celebrating my birthday in Acapulco. March, we're going to go somewhere outside of Mexico for our visa run. Stay tuned for, that. We haven't quite decided where we're going. Who knows where we're going in April? Maybe Oaxaca, maybe Tulum. And then May, we're going to be potentially leaving Mexico City and heading back to Canada, maybe in June or July. We've got a couple of hikes on our radar for this summer. It's the first summer without any weddings since like 2013, which is pretty crazy. Although there's still time for, a friend or two to get engaged and plan a wedding for the summer. But so far we don't have very much on our radar for the summer, which is really nice. And then where's the fall taking us? Who knows?
Yeah, TBD. We had been, had this plan to go somewhere in Latin America for quite a bit of time. And it was like, that was originally our plan before Atlanta, and then it was our plan before Asia. And now, we haven't gotten down to Central America yet, but being able to set up in Mexico. So we don't have that like next place on our radar. Yeah, but as the year moves on, we'll certainly figure it out. But I think we will definitely continue being more of,
slow nomad?
yeah, like steadily moving, like, okay, somewhere for 3, 6, 7 months, somewhere else for that period of time. And then maybe, some smaller trips in between here and there, but for the most part, finding somewhere new to kind of set up as a home base.
Yeah. And so, we haven't obviously talked about, we haven't really even talked about past Mexico City / decided where we're going in March and April. But if you could if money and time wasn't an issue, where do you think would be some like top places on your list for next fall?
Money and time, if there was like absolutely no constraints.
I guess
Space.
I meant like work.
Space station.
Okay.
Yep.
Maybe let's work within our planet.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't really thought too much about it at this point. So.
Okay, well, I've got a couple ideas, so I'll share them.
Okay.
One thing I'm kind of interested in is going over to Eastern Europe. I got my Estonian e-residency and opened an Estonian-based company this past fall, and I'm keen to visit Estonia. We've also heard great things about Romania, so that's also kind of on my radar, somewhere I'd love to go. Traveling Africa at some point would be really cool if finances allow. I've also, we've talked about going to like Panama for an extended time. There's a yoga and Spanish program that happens every fall in Colombia that I'm really interested in. And I turn 30, not in 2018, but in early 2019. So I also really want to go to Antarctica, which I think would probably need to happen in the fall of next year or I guess fall, winter type area to do it before I turned 30 or this summer. But that seems unlikely. So yeah,
many options.
I know those are kind of on my radar. Has that sparked any ideas in you, or
not yet?
Just going with the flow. All right, we would love to hear from you. Let us know, what you feel really excited about for this past year, what your highlights and your lowlights have been. And then we'd also love to hear about, your plans for 2018. And if you have any big suggestions for us, you can send us an email at info@theworldwanderers.com or join our private Facebook group at World Wanderers, an online community. As always, thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the new year.
Hasta el nuevo año.
Ciao.
To find more information, relevant links, and photos talked about in this week's episode, check out theworldwanderers.com.
If you have a question, comment, or feedback, send us an email at info@theworldwanderers.com. Join our community on Facebook at The World Wanderers or on Twitter at World Wanderers 1. As always, thanks so much for listening.
Have a great day.
Bye.